So today's the day that I think I'm finally going to get to finish working on the Dragonfly gown. If you haven't been following along, I've been working on this gown for over a year now. I've already completely finished the bodice, and I've shown that in other videos, so if you haven't seen those, be sure to check those out first. But today I'm finally going to get started on the skirt. So the plan for the skirt is to make it out of 3 layers of fabric. First I have this dark purple charmeuse, which will be like the base layer of the skirt. Next I have this dusky purple silk chiffon. And then for the top layer, I'm going to use this Dragonfly tool just like I did for the bodice here. So since I've been working on this gown for over a year, I got a little ahead of myself about a year ago and already cut out 1 layer of the skirt. The problem is then I took a whole year in between cutting 1 layer of the skirt and I haven't cut out the other layers of the skirt yet. This is a slight problem because I don't remember what ratios I planned for the difference between the skirt and the middle layer and the top layer. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of backtracking to figure out what I did. Once I do that, the rest of the construction of the skirt should be pretty simple. I'm just going to sew each layer of the skirt together and then attach it to the bodice. And the only thing that really should be tricky with this is because the bodice has a corset back here, I also want it to be adjustable at the waist. So I'm going to have to extend the corset back into the skirt a little bit. And because I don't want there to be like an open gap on the butt area here, I'm going to have to create a sort of like modesty panel in the skirt as well. Though that kind of sounds like a headache, that is a little bit less of a headache than installing like an invisible zipper or something. So we're going to go with this way and we're not going to complain about it. Once I get the skirt attached, I'm still playing with the idea of adding on a few more little dragonfly appliques along the waist to kind of blend it in. But I'm going to see how it looks all together first before I do that. So without further ado, let's get started on this. So I'm taking a look at what I've already cut out. This is the base layer of the skirt in the silk charmeuse. So it looks like I have cut 3 pieces on the fold and 1 piece for center back. And these are all pretty much the same shape. This is a very basic A-line skirt shape, and I think once these are all put together, it should make a circle. So I've cut this out so that it doesn't have side seams, but it does have a center back seam and princess seams in the back and in the front. So that does make it a 5-piece skirt, but maybe not like a traditional 5-piece skirt because I didn't do the side seams. I opted instead to have a side panel for the skirt on both sides and then a center front piece, and then on the back it would be the same as the center front. I would not have a center back seam there if I didn't need to, but I have to have some way of getting into the dress, so that's why it's there. But basically the shape for all of these pieces is exactly the same. So I've got my side back piece and my center back piece here. So this is essentially 1/4 of the skirt, and I just took that measurement and it's about half of my waist measurement. So I guess that means that I doubled the waist on this layer. And it looks like I didn't make it quite a full circle skirt. It is going to be like, it's not quite a half circle either. I'm not sure what I did there, but it is just going to be the base layer. So I didn't want to put too much fabric, and also silk charmeuse is really expensive. So I wanted to cut back on fabric costs. And the most important thing is just to make sure that I make the 2 layers on top of that more gathered than this one so that there's enough fabric to go on top of this layer. Since the layer I'm using for the middle layer is going to be silk chiffon, it's a lot lighter weight of a fabric than this silk charmeuse. So I think I'm going to do 3 times my waist measurement on that layer so that it has a little bit more fabric in the fullness than this layer. And then for the top layer, the tulle fabric, I'm going to do 4 times the amount. And I think that 4 times the waist measurement is pretty standard for a tulle fabric since it's so lightweight. That is if you're making like a big ball gown or something and you want to have a really voluminous skirt, which I do. So I really want to make sure that the silk chiffon layer is a full circle skirt, but I'm not exactly sure how much silk chiffon I bought. I know that I calculated it to make sure that I had just enough for the concept that I had in mind. So we'll see if my concept back then aligns with what I have in my mind now. But I'm going to lay the fabric out first and see what I can come up with. After rolling out my fabric, it seemed like I had exactly enough to make another 4-piece skirt with 3 times the waist gathered into the skirt. I never use a pattern for cutting circle skirts. Instead, I use a simple circle skirt formula to plot out the shape of my skirt with pins. By the way, let me know if you'd like a video on how to make a circle skirt this way. I did run into a little issue while doing this because I forgot that silk fabric is usually not as wide as other fabrics, so I had to shorten my skirt a bit and hope that it was still long enough in the end. I also had to do less fullness in the top layer of tulle fabric than I had originally planned because of this issue as well. But once I navigated those issues, I managed to get all my skirt pieces cut out and I was finally ready to start sewing. The first step was to combine all my skirt seams together, and I did this mostly with my serger, except for the tulle layer, which doesn't need a seam finish. Next, I ran gathering stitches through all 3 skirt layers. It might seem faster to do this through all the layers at once, but I find you don't get as nice of a gather when you force all the layers together. After pressing all the seams I just sewed, I put all the layers together on the dress form, and I could finally get a better look at the full dress for the first time. So as I was saying earlier, I want to have these grommets continue down a bit into the skirt so that this dress remains adjustable at the waist as well. I need to plan for there being somewhat of a gap here without this being exposed. So I'm going to put a little Modesty panel piece right behind here. It's going to be sort of triangular shaped, so I'm going to get the measurements for that. I think estimating a 3-inch gap here is fair. So the finished length, I want to make it at least 9 inches so that it covers this whole part. And then for the width, I want it to have at least 3 inches here, but I also want it to extend past a bit so that there's no chance of it showing your butt or anything there. So I'm just going to pattern out this general shape. I have this paper folded in half. So I'm going to make it 10 inches just so that there's a little bit extra coverage extending past the opening. And I'm going to make it 6 inches up here, just so that there's plenty of coverage on either side and enough room to sew it to the skirt. And add my seam allowances. So that'll be my top layer, and I'm actually going to cut another layer of the charmeuse just so that I can line this, and it'll also add like a little bit extra stability to this piece. So I'll stay stitch this piece together first, and then I'll add the lining. When I add the lining, I'm going to stitch it all the way around here, and I'm just going to leave a little opening down here where I can flip it inside out. Pro tip to get a clean corner, I like to stitch the seam allowance down like this. So I'm flipping it to the inside edge. When I flip it, it makes a nice little corner. So in the dress, it'll go in like that. It'll go behind all these layers. And lastly, before I attach this to the bodice, I'm going to add grommets here. So I want to reinforce this edge a little bit. I'm going to put some binding around this edge to give it a little bit more for the grommet to punch into. And that's how the finished edge ends up looking. Next, I'll finally clean up the waistline of my bodice and begin to attach all the different skirt layers to the bodice, gathering them each individually as I go. Okay, the skirt is officially attached to the bodice, which means that it's pretty much done. I just need to finish up the hem. So I'm going to go try this on because I'm so excited to see the final look. I'm not going to show you yet though because I want to save it for when it's all finished. So it's getting pretty late tonight, so I think I'm going to finish the rest of the hem up tomorrow, but that is the next thing I'm going to do, and then I'll decide if I need to put these little dragonfly pieces on the waist. To hem the skirts, I'll hang the dress on a dress form and pin a measuring tape to the waist, then measure down my desired skirt measurement. You have to reposition the measuring tape at the waist every few inches to make sure that it's straight all the way around. I'll only hem the 2 silk layers to start since the tulle layer will be handled a little bit differently. So my pins mark the hemline, and then I'll just cut 1/2 inch below that to add seam allowance. I usually prefer to do this with a rotary cutter, but my mat is getting pretty old and doesn't allow for a smooth cut, at least on this charmeuse fabric. The chiffon seemed to respond a little bit better. Before finalizing the hem, I'll put it back on the dress form to make sure everything looks even. Since circle skirts can be tricky to hem, this step is essential. Then, using my rolled hem foot, I'll begin the long process of hemming all this skirt fullness. Now the dress goes back on the dress form to finish up the tulle hem, which I'll do directly from the dress form by marking the hem in the original way, then trimming it right here and now. Then I like to go over it with a rotary cutter to make sure that the hem is nice and smooth. Next is adding the grommets to the skirt, which I do with my trusty grommet punch. And I just did it on the charmeuse layer of the skirt so it would be hidden, and I think it turned out quite nice. The last step is to add the Modesty panel on the skirt opening. I'm adding a French tack to the bottom of the skirt opening and attaching it to the Modesty panel. A French tack is basically kind of like a crochet stitch. It's also called a daisy chain or a tailor's tack. It's really useful for holding something in place but still allowing for movement, which is necessary for something like this Modesty panel, since the position of it will change depending on how much the skirt is open or not. Once I have the chain the length that I want it to be, I attach it to the Modesty panel, and that's done. And then the last and final step is to add snaps to either side of the Modesty panel at the top of the skirt opening, so that it can snap into place and won't move around when it's being worn. So with that, the dress is all finished. I'll show the reveal in a second, but since the lighting wasn't super good to show the up-close details, I thought I'd show you them here. I kind of wish I would have changed the bobbin stitching on the cups to be purple to match the purple cup lining, but I think I'm going to be adding bra cups to this anyway, so once I do that, you can't even really see the stitching there at all. And now on to the reveal. Well, I never thought this day would come, but the dress is finally done. I've been working on this for about 1 year and 4 months, I guess, so I never thought I'd actually finish it. But it taking that long is not really the fault of it being a really complicated gown, because it's not, but just because I just didn't have time to work on it all the time. In reality, I think it only took me maybe 10 days total, maybe less, to put this whole thing together, and that's only working like a few hours a day. Of course, it does take a lot longer to do things when you're filming, so I think if I had just sat down to make this gown, probably 3 days I could have whipped it out, but that's okay. I really enjoyed the process, and I did not think that it would turn out this well. Thinking about things that I would have done differently, I'm not too sure. At first I didn't really like the way that the bodice looks so much different from the skirt because it's sheer here and not sheer down here. But once I put the belt on, I feel like it really brought it together. And also just like looking at it at the lighting inside is a lot different than looking at it outside. So once I wore it outside, then I was really in love with how it looked. And it didn't even matter that there's sort of a difference between the bodice and the skirt. But that being said, I might have experimented with at least putting a layer of this purple chiffon in the bodice when I was doing the layering here, because it is really, really sheer still. So I probably would have put it in between this dragonfly layer and then the supportive mesh layer that I have underneath. It would have been a little bit more cohesive, but I also really like how sheer this looks because it just feels like I'm being surrounded by dragonflies as my clothing. I did come to sort of a moment of hesitation when I sewed just this layer of tulle to the bodice, and I wasn't sure if I should add the skirt or not because it looked so beautiful on its own. I really was just contemplating whether or not it would make sense to just have like a very sheer dress. But ultimately, I thought that having a skirt would make it look a little bit more elegant rather than, you know, underneath this layer, I could wear like bloomers or something, but I just didn't think that bloomers, like, don't get me wrong, bloomers are cute and I love them, but they're not super elegant. They're more like, you know, schoolgirl coquettish kind of thing, and I wanted something that was like a very sophisticated looking gown in the end. And besides that, I also had already spent the money on 2 layers of silk fabric, which was a lot, and I had already cut and sewed the skirt pieces together. I just needed to attach them to the bodice. So I was already like really far in, and I thought, you know, I've made it this far, I'm just going to commit to it and make the original gown that I had in mind. And all that being said, I'm glad I did, because I do think that it looks really elegant, and if I ever have an event to wear something like this to, then I think that it'll be much classier having a full skirt under rather than just like sort of a sheer little negligee dress with bloomers underneath. As far as the back goes, I didn't really need to use the Modesty panel that I added in and the grommet lacing, so I didn't actually lace the grommets in the back here. I just stopped the lacing at the waist and tucked the laces into the skirt. But I did want to make this dress adjustable so that if my size ever changed, I could wear it later on, or if I decide to sell this or something, then it would fit somebody else. So that was all made in mind when I put the grommets in the skirt, and I think that it would still look really pretty with like lacing going down the butt even, if need be, for the measurements. So I think that's all I have to say about this gown. I am kind of sad that I'm done with it, because it's been a project that I've always had to fall back on when I wanted to do some sewing, but didn't really know what to do or felt intimidated to start a new project. And now that it's done, I have to go back to the drawing board and start over again. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. I do have some other ideas that have been building up in the past year, so it might be time for me to get to one of those. Anyway, that's it for this gown journey. I hope that you enjoyed following along. And let me know if you enjoyed a video series like this for one long project. I really enjoyed making it, so I would love to pick up a new project and start again. In the meantime, I hope I can find some ball or event to wear this gown to, but that's it for me for now. Until next time.